Welcome to the Reconnected Podcast, a home for sharing, understanding, and growth for the retail grocery store industry. During each episode, we will meet an amazing member of our community as we learn about their story and jointly explore the intricacies and challenges of our supply chain. Through it all, we'll remember and honor that everything starts with the real people who spend so much of their lives supporting the retail food supply chain. We will bring together the voices of manufacturers, distributors, and retailers as we journey together to help our industry reconnect. My name is Luke Abbott, and I'm excited to have you join us. Welcome to the Reconnected Podcast, where today we have Nick Mindel from Amberstone, who's joining us to learn more about the venture capital world. And I'd say for this podcast, we've never had anyone from the VC or private equity community. So Nick, I've known you for a number of years, and I really liked your energy and style and thought you'd be like the first one in this space to have here. And I'm grateful that you were able to join us.
I appreciate it, and I'm honored and humbled to be the first here. So, hopefully
it's a lot of pressure.
Hopefully I can set the. Yeah, I was just gonna say, hopefully I can set the tone for all the rest to come behind me.
I love it. Well, I'm sure you will. And I always like starting all these conversations off with providing 3 or 4 minutes of space just to kind of hear some of your background. Like, how does one get to be sitting where you're sitting today? What was your journey?
I wish I could say it was this straight line journey, but I think like many of the entrepreneurs that we've partnered with and backed, it's never linear. It's always has some left and right curves. So, I was actually born into the restaurant industry, and through my formative years of high school and college, I got to see my dad build a company and take it public in '98, go through a go private transaction in 2001. A bolt-on transaction with that private equity fund around 2003, 2004, I believe, and then a final sale over to a large private equity fund called Rourke Capital out of Atlanta in the mid-2000s. And, with that in kind of going through my years, I was like, wow, what is this? Like, what is this private equity thing? How does this all work? And, really influenced what I studied in college and how I kind of established my career after college. So, I graduated. I went to go work for what at the time was a small boutique bank, and has now since grown into probably the preeminent multi-unit bank in the United States called North Point Advisors, where I spent probably 95% of my time working on multi-unit franchise restaurants, and then maybe 5% of my time working on more branded consumer goods. From there, I went over into the mezzanine debt side and worked for a group called THL Credit, providing mezzanine debt for both LBO and MBO transactions, and then returned back to business school, got my MBA at USC, and then graduated out and joined what at the time was Piper Jaffray, is now Piper Sandler, working within their lifestyle of healthy, active, and sustainability with an investment banker named Janica Lane, working on deals like Yasso, RX Bar, Suja, handful of others. And it got to the point where I started kind of looking at how to bring deals into Piper at that time. And, I remember distinctly having this conversation with Janica where, I noticed a number of brands that were probably a little bit subscale for Piper, but shared many of the same characteristics of the Justins, the Yassos, the Sujas, all these brands that we've seen, which is, phenomenal velocity, strong distribution, good gross margins that led to profitable growth, category disruptors. And, I remember asking Janica, I said, who's going to write these smaller checks? And she's like, it's not really the universe that I play in. I dabble in some of those checks as an angel investor, but really that's not what we're going to do. And I was like, well, what if I started a small fund that did that? And so, rolled out with a close friend and business partner from business school at USC. We started Trail Post Ventures, which was a fundless sponsor where we would raise on a deal by deal basis. And so, invested in the seed round of brands like Nut Pods and June Shine, writing smaller checks to support these smaller rounds and kind of emerging growth brands. And through that, I kind of rekindled my relationship with Alex Bernstein, one of the partners here. And he's like, listen, I've participated in a few of these SPVs. I'm now going to start my own fund. Do you want to join me? And yeah, absolutely. Sounds like a great idea. So I partnered up with Alex and another individual named James Graham, and the three of us started Amberstone, going on 5 years now,
Wow.
and successfully raised Fund One, deployed that into 6 partner brands, and then finished up a fundraise on Fund Two, and recently made our first investment out of Fund Two. So definitely not straightforward, but yeah, certainly been fun, and picked up a lot of skills and experiences along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And you live in San Diego, is that right? Or I thought you were nearby, right?
Yeah, I've lived in LA, I've lived in San Diego, and I've lived
Mm,
in San Francisco. So certainly made my my trips along the West Coast.
yeah, love it. And family,
Yeah, during this whole kind of journey, I was lucky enough to meet my wife at business school, and she was patient enough to stick with me as I was an investment banker and doing all this crazy stuff and working these crazy hours. And we've got 2 wonderful children now, a 3-year-old boy and a 8-month-old girl, and it's been a phenomenal journey,
oh,
personally and
congratulations.
professionally.
Congratulations. It's huge. And
Thank you.
you seem relaxed. I think there's a perception of people in your type of business that you're intense or or wound up, but you seem
They
really approachable and
I've been described as a laid back type A.
yeah. Yeah, you're still driving, but it's yeah. It's not going to be so intense.
Yeah, everybody drives in a little bit different way.
Mm,
I think my experience in restaurants, I mean, I worked all the way, from a busboy up to a general manager of one of my
yeah.
dad's restaurants, and yeah, I think that experience of having to deal with, really the full spectrum of humanity that comes into a restaurant has really given me the skill set to, find ways to connect with people, find ways to have conversations with people, and
Mm,
has certainly influenced kind of how I go around doing the job that I do.
right. I love it. So, and where Amberstone plays, and it sounds like where you've really focused on your career has been food. Is there kind of any kind of deeper purpose for you about why kind of this more natural food space has been your focus?
I'd like to say that there's some altruistic, deeper purpose here, but I think it's
Yeah.
really about kind of pattern recognition. And so,
Okay.
for us, we play broadly in fast-moving consumer goods. So we define
Okay.
that as food and beverage, beauty and personal care, pets, babies, and some household goods. And really what it comes down to is velocity. It has to have the opportunity either off the physical or the digital
Mm,
shelf to interact with the consumer at least once a quarter, but hopefully more like products that are really part of your daily routine. So
mm-hmm.
coffee alternatives being probably the best example of
Staples.
what is in the daily routine
Mm-hmm.
of the United States consumer. And I think too, where maybe 8, 9, 10 years ago, VMG really had the playbook of these brands that were
Yeah.
beginning in natural, had a good data story out of natural, and were able to transition into conventional. We're seeing now that conventional grocers are much more open and
They
apt
are.
to take on more naturally oriented brands. And so, really it's a focus around velocities, unit
Yep.
level economics, and our confidence that this is not simply these brands that we're looking at are not simply brands that are going to work in Los Angeles and San Francisco and Seattle
Yeah.
and New York, but are also going to be just as successful in St. Louis and Louisville and Toledo, Ohio. So
Mm-hmm.
that's sort of how we envision the world, and sort of a high level of kind of the types of products and brands that we're looking at.
Great. Thank you for that. And just to give you context for like the Reconnected audience is literally the whole kind of natural food supply chain, like distributors, manufacturers, brokers, retailers. And so they may not have some of these groups may not have any knowledge or very little knowledge of kind of where you play and what you do. And I often, I even personally get confused the idea between like a private equity, it's like fund and VC and where do you play and what are the differences?
Sure. We really define ourselves as emerging growth, and uh, might have been something that I can't take credit that we coined that term, but I think it's important to make a distinction between venture capital and maybe it's best to think about it as a spectrum. So I think you
Okay.
have friends, family, angels, venture capital,
Mm-hmm.
emerging growth equity, and then traditional buyout private equity.
Okay.
And I think it very much correlates to stage. And so, if you are a potentially kind of pre-revenue or maybe even sub 1 million in revenue, you're really in that friends, family, and angels group. If you're scaling from 1 to 5 million, maybe, you sit very much in that venture bucket.
Okay.
If you're scaling, really, I'd say north of 7 million and have visibility to 50, I would call it emerging growth. If
Okay.
you're north of 50, you're playing in this ballpark where, you could be a target for a strategic buyout, you could be a target for a private equity full buyout, or you could be a target for a large growth equity check.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's really on a spectrum, and it's really around size. From where we look at it and how we really dissect kind of the universe that we look at, we think we're playing in a spot where we're not necessarily making a bet. We're making much more informed investment decisions
Mm-hmm.
supported by data access. And so these are brands that have demonstrated product market fit, that give us the opportunity to see velocity, either at natural and or conventional or mass or club. They've kind of expanded out, most likely are national brands, and really reached a fairly steady state gross margin profile
Mm-hmm.
that enable us to have a high degree of confidence of what their future cash needs will be, if any. And we certainly enjoy being credibly the last capital needed, not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily the last capital that a brand ever wants. And I think that's an important distinction.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you for helping me understand. I really didn't fully understand where you played, and it feels like it's like if you think about the supply chain, but it's also like there's a chain here too. Like there has to be the friends and family and angels that fund to get to the point where it can go to a VC to go to the point where it's for you. And does that resonate?
Yeah. I think to a degree that is one route to take. Now there are certainly multiple routes that can still lead to the same conclusion. I think a great example is Bloom. Bloom Nutrition is our first investment out of Fund 2.
Mm-hmm.
They were bootstrapped. They really raised almost zero capital to reach a point where they were much more prepared for a larger growth equity round.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly, certain categories enable that. I think, beauty, personal care,
Yeah, where the
vitamins,
margins
minerals,
are higher.
supplements.
Yeah.
Yeah, that type of margin profile certainly can enable you to bypass the need for, maybe you'll still take friends and family just to get off the ground, but you bypass that need for the venture, emerging growth, and you potentially just kind of hop, skip, and a jump
Mm-hmm.
over, really all of those types of capital and straight into, traditional debt providers and non-dilutive financing coupled with a larger growth equity round.
Got it. That makes sense. And at least my perception is that something happened a couple of years ago to at least some steps in this funding chain where money kind of disappeared. It felt like to me that venture capital or access to earlier stage capital had been somewhat democratized, and then it felt like a year and a half, 2 years ago, like the door closed for a lot of brands that at one point could have had access, but that access disappeared. Does that resonate with you at all? Did you see anything like this in the market?
Yeah, we definitely have. I think I always think about a pendulum
Mm-hmm.
within the investment community, and I've seen this is now my third shift that I've probably seen. 2008,
Mm-hmm.
2012, 2020 were kind of major shifts that we've seen. Um, you know, Over the last, I would say, 4 years, and maybe we just go from the inception of Amberstone because I think it's influenced how we invest. When we founded ourselves, we were hyper focused on velocity and unit level economics,
Mm-hmm.
and oftentimes we were seeing brands coming through that the gross margin or the unit level economics, as I say, took a backseat to growth, and investors were really looking for growth at all costs.
Yep.
They just wanted to see 200, 300, 400% year over year growth, and cash flow be damned. It
Yep.
didn't matter. And that's never how we've approached it. And so oftentimes we actually were losing deals because, we weren't meeting valuation expectations. We,
Yeah.
Really kind of looked at the cash flow and said, I'm not going to give you a 3x revenue multiple if you're, losing 200% of
Right.
your total revenue on net income. There was a fundamental disconnect. And I think, to a degree, there was a lot of tourist capital that came into the space. You saw traditional tech funds entering into the food and beverage
Yes.
space and trying to scale brands as if they were a SaaS brand. And, I think that fundamentally altered the space, in that it introduced a significant amount of capital that didn't have expertise within fast-moving consumer goods. And then it also introduced valuations that brands simply couldn't meet. They couldn't scale to the point where they were prepared to meet those valuations. And then we got into a situation where you had certainly COVID, you had supply chain disruptions, you had an environment where both capital that had formerly been in the space was leaving because consumer was not proving to be the type of growth that they expected. And you were dealing with compression of margins along the way, so increased cash burn. And as those pieces came together, you got back to a pendulum swinging where it went back to consumers or investors that fundamentally understood consumer, were focused on the metrics that created real and lasting businesses, and a number of brands that weren't built to endure, weren't built to scale, simply had to wash out of the system. And I think we're still kind of on the tail end of that. But what's emerging now is a new ecosystem, or an evolved ecosystem, where you're left with a number of funds that fundamentally understand consumer brands and consumer products and how to scale them in the most cash efficient way that you can within fast moving consumer goods, coupled with brands that are much better prepared with better gross margins that lead to cash flow much earlier in their life stages, and can endure through different cycles. That say, we would love capital, but we don't need capital. It's all about finding the right partner to help us accelerate our growth, but we're not going to do that at the cost of the cash efficiency that we've had over the last 2 years or 3 years.
It feels like business 101 in many ways. We got back to, there's almost like this artificial bubble we were in, where like whenever I hear people telling me, the old rules don't apply anymore, this is the new paradigm, and I go, nope, there are new paradigms.
I always look at my dad, like he would open restaurants, and you heard oftentimes, oh, well, we're going to be the lost leader of this, or none of my dad's restaurants, he wasn't building a restaurant to be the lost leader of a restaurant. Every single one had to work, and if it wasn't making net income, that restaurant was a failure. And I think that's influenced certainly how I look at the universe. And when I partnered with Alex and James, they had somewhat of a similar perspective of we have to build brands that can stand on their own and be in a position to be really the masters of their own destiny. That if they're cash flow positive and they're growing in a responsible manner, call it still achieving 20 to 50% growth year over year, doing it in a cash flow positive way, that's an appealing brand who can go to a private equity firm or a venture firm and dictate really dictate what they're looking for. Say, we want the right partner. This is what we need help with. Can you do that? And can we do a price discovery process where, we can meet with an arm's length transaction where we're all comfortable getting, in this long-term relationship together.
Right. No, that's great. I love those themes. And, I remember I've been in the food industry for like 30 years now. And I remember I would go to a party and tell people I was in the food industry 20 years ago. It was like, like yawn, whatever. let's talk to people more exciting. But something seemed to shift in our space, didn't it? Like in the last decade, where food became very culturally relevant in a kind of a more hip, cool way. I mean, growing up, there were no emerging brands, right? But I'm a little bit older than you, I think. But it's like I'm wondering if like the tech money and the stars we see investing, sports stars, movie stars, that's it's all kind of newer, right? In the last half decade to a decade. And I'm wondering if a lot of the money came in that created the bubble was like the coolness factor of food, and the companies they became like celebrities. A lot of these CEOs. I don't know if that resonates with you.
I mean, I definitely can see the perspective.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like Mari Llewellyn is an amazing founder, leader of her organization, and happens to be this incredible face of the brand, and
Mm-hmm.
has created such a real story around her, that it has lended a significant amount of authenticity to what she has built at Bloom.
Mm-hmm.
And I certainly think some of the capital coming in has been both positive and negative, but I also believe that really social media has driven a lot of this.
Yeah, true.
But behind social media, there's the macro trends of people wanting to be healthier.
Yep.
20 or 30 years ago, was, you're going to go for a jog. Like that's an interesting concept. Like,
Right.
health has become mainstream. Clean
Yes.
ingredients has become mainstream. Low sugar to no sugar has become mainstream. Non-alcoholic beverages or reduction in drinking to create a healthier lifestyle has become
Mm-hmm.
mainstream. And that healthier lifestyle has been supported by athletes, Instagram influencers, TikTok influencers, etc. And that has influenced this proliferation of brands within the food and beverage space. But
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the day, the proliferation is one thing. It's creating good brand and good
Yep.
product is parallel and ancillary to that.
And sustains it ideally over
Exactly.
time, or else
Exactly. So,
yeah.
it's great to see these entrepreneurs come up and create just this incredible ecosystem that has developed around food and beverage. At the
Mm-hmm.
same time, there's a subset of founders that understand the cool dynamics and
Mm-hmm.
creating brand and really having that authentic voice to the
Mm-hmm.
consumer while also understanding business fundamentals.
Yeah.
And it's where those get married
Mm,
that
yes.
you start seeing these really incredible
Mm.
breakout brands.
Yeah, that's fair. Sometimes I feel like it's more of a like our industry can be more of a social network, and there's all these parties and events, and actually San Diego events are amazing, like
Yeah.
and very, very valuable. And Mari
No, no, no.
Roz is to be great.
I think it is, and I think that's one of the rare qualities of consumers that every founder, maybe not every investor, but a number of investors and third party providers, we just tend to go that extra step
Hmm.
to help somebody. You
Right.
need 30 minutes, I'll give you 30 minutes.
Yep.
You want me to walk through a deck that you're building to try and pitch target? Yeah, I'll walk through that deck with you. I'll make sure that data story looks good. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's one of those rare industries where I think, there's a fair bit of co-opetition, where
Yeah.
you're gonna
Co-opetition.
cooperate.
That's
Yeah,
a
you're
that's a
gonna
new word for me. I like that one.
yeah, you're gonna cooperate with each other. You're gonna go head to head with each other in certain categories, but yeah, at the end of the day, it really does seem that a rising tide is still lifting all ships within consumer, and our industry tends to go above and beyond to help each other.
Yeah, yeah. I noticed that. I don't know if you know Carrie from Abbott. It's one of my investments, and I'm on the board there. And it's just funny. She's talking to like everybody else that we're competing with all the time, and they're all sharing stories. And I'm just like, that's so interesting that you guys are like we're going at it with each other, but you guys just have these great conversations and
Listen,
share knowledge.
the rebrand for Abbott's is fantastic. Getting away from being Abbott's Butcher to just
Yes.
Abbott's, I love.
Yeah.
And frankly, the chorizo product that they had at Expo was one of my standout products of Expo. I thought it was absolutely delicious. Or I guess what's Gen Z say? It was fire.
I
It
love
was
it.
great.
I love it. And that's been an interesting story too. And I'm curious, maybe if this relates to anything you've been thinking about. Like when Abbott started, I remember like I was working with her 4 or 5 years ago. Like the burger analog just wasn't resonating. Like with the chicken, the chorizo were kind of new, but now we're seeing the burger analog do really well, right? And what we saw, at least in this space, was that there was like first gen, like Morningstar and some of the other brands that would have been like first wave plant-based, and they're more crunchy granola. And second wave became about like a novelty of like, hey, it bleeds beet juice and taste, but it was crappy ingredients, right? And then I think consumers kind of fell for that in some level. They thought, hey, this is all plant-based is healthier for the earth and for me. And then they realized they didn't feel good. And then you had like an Abbott's, which is like third wave, right? Which is saying it's going to taste good and it's going to have a great bite and whatever you expect. And then, but it's also going to be really healthy. In fact, we'll put those ingredients on the front. But then you talk to retailers today, they're like, whoa, gosh, plant-based doesn't work. But it's like, no, this second wave didn't work. There's this third wave. Now we're in this J curve, right? Where you're seeing sets contract and a lot of challenges. But I feel like there's this, it's not always a straight line in a lot of these newer categories that are being created. Does this resonate with you?
Nothing's ever a straight line. I mean, I worked on Yasso, and the amount of growing pains that they experience kind of in the middle of their life cycle before they hit this really accelerated growth curve. I think is reminiscent of a number of brands. I mean, listen, there's certainly some brands that are just linear rocket ships. RX bar, like linear rocket ship.
Yep.
But even brands that we probably think were rocket ships from the very early stages, like certainly had some growth difficulties. I mean, I'm sure if you talk to Justin, like he would say that the beginning of Justin's was not an easy journey for us. And it's only when we did X, Y, Z that we really found our stride. And, I would say that is, even if you talk to Peter at RX, he'd probably say the same thing. Like you look at it from the outside and you think it's these, overnight success stories, but he probably was cooking batches in his mom's kitchen, and they came out horrible, and he probably was terrified that this was never going to work. And it was iteration and perseverance that ended up just getting them to a point where they found this product market fit, and they were able to scale the way they did. But I think it's important for entrepreneurs to remember that this is not linear. These are not overnight successes. This takes time. It takes a significant amount of effort.
Yeah, like totally. Yeah, it's funny. You probably noticed this in your life too. At least I noticed it. So when I look back, it all feels like the dots were always there, and they all connected nicely. But when you're in the moment, looking forward, in any given moment, you're like, I have no idea like how this is going to happen, and it really is courage. It's like there is fear, and it's courage just to push forward, and tenacity, and like everything you just said. I agree, and that's the even the straight lines are never as straight as it appears from the outside, at least in my belief. And I'm curious. You said something earlier that I wanted to dig into, like the conventional space definitely is like re-itemizing more and more with natural, more cutting edge products. The playbook that I've always followed has been, let's go cut our teeth in natural. Like let's go deep versus wide at the beginning. Let's go, own Southern California, Bristol Farms, Mothers, Gelson's, Lazy, Jumbos, right? And just let's go do that well. Merchandise, promote, demo, and validate that this product at this time, at this price, right, and this packaging actually works, adjust as needed before I go to the next step of natural, another region, or to Whole Foods Global and Sprouts nationally. And I want to just do that. And then after I've really validated, maybe I want to go to Publix next, and then an HEB, like some of the friendly conventionals, and then continue to grow from there. Do you feel like that model has shifted because of how conventional is showing up today?
In much the same way that the route to scale from a capital perspective has shown now multiple different ways to scale a brand. You could go the traditional friends and family to venture to larger growth to exit. Like that certainly is still there. These non-dilutive financing options, SBA loans, et cetera, and getting really creative, maybe USDA loans, things along those lines can help you scale and get to there. So that's another route. I would just say that conventional grocers now provide an alternative route to market that if you feel it's appropriate for your brand, you can explore that. Bloom's first two retail customers were Target and Walmart.
Wow. Wow.
And they felt that that was just a better fit for where they were and where their customer wanted to discover them. For Abbott's, your customer might want to discover you in Whole Foods and Sprouts and Lazy Acres and Seaside Market, and that might still be the appropriate route. For other brands, maybe it's somewhere in between. You have your smaller regional natural grocers or your one-offs like a Seaside. On the other end of the spectrum, you have the Targets and Walmarts and Costco's of the world. Potentially in between, as you mentioned, you have some of these more friendly regional grocers, the Mariano's, the Publix, the H-E-B's, where you kind of have this hybridized approach of saying, this is a much more naturally oriented conventional grocer, but it's conventional. And I think if I can demonstrate that my data story works at this more naturally oriented conventional, I have a better opportunity to take that data story to a buyer at Kroger, Albertson, Safeway, et cetera, and say, listen, I'm in a naturally oriented conventional channel, but the data demonstrates that this is working in conventional and that the demographics in this channel that I'm selling in fit the demographics of the broader Kroger channel, the broader Albertsons channel. My data supports you guys putting me in. And I think it all comes down to just being able to put together a very convincing data story. Buyers historically were a little bit more relationship driven. It was, let's do some dinner, let's get to know each other, and let's do this. And I think, really over the last 5 or 10 years, but particularly accelerating over the last 5 years, we've seen this changing of the guard within buyers, and really a reliance on data to make informed decisions about what they are putting on their shelf, and using significant resources. I mean, we're talking, granular receipt level data to understand who the demographics of a particular channel are, who is your shopper for this particular category, why does this brand appeal to this shopper, why does it create a basket size that is 20% larger than the basket size that exists without this product in it. What is cross-basket affinity? When you pick up this product, are you also picking up 3 other high-value products within a supermarket? And really getting down to this point where they are saying, okay, this product is additive to the category, additive to the margin of the store. It's not replacing something on shelf. It is simply adding to my category. And by the way, it's also creating a basket size that is 30% larger than.
That's compelling. You have to bring it in.
It's hugely compelling. It's hugely compelling. But I think that's my way of saying that the old way of doing business is gone. And as entrepreneurs and brands that are scaling, really being hyper focused on your data story and investing resources behind that, or getting scrappy and figuring out how to tell that story is becoming just paramount. It's becoming the only way to make the case that you deserve to be on shelf.
Yeah, it is. I mean,
you have a reason to win.
Yeah, at the end of the day, the category manager's job is to grow the category, and our job is to show up with, if you're further along, a tremendous amount of evidence of where we've done that, right? And how could you not bring us in, right? Because and to your point, it isn't relationship driven as it used to be. I mean, I grew up with V-Driven over the last 5.5 years, really working in the dairy space at the beginning, a lot of plant-based items, right? And refrigerated plant-based. And the best buyers I've dealt with have been at Whole Foods and Sprouts in terms of like the quality. And both of those buyers in that space did not come from food. Like they were within a year or two of coming into this space, but yet we're able to make amazing decisions because, to your point, it's really, are you going to grow? Do I see the data to prove it or not? And so and I think as an earlier stage brand, then it's like, okay, where can I create that data story that's going to be compelling for like the next step I want to go, and just invest everything there and do so with, like I always say, humility, Nick. It's like even that shows up at my doorstep and says that they think they figured it all out. I know you haven't. I mean, Abbott's that we were just talking about, it's a great example. I think we, adjusted SRP, packaging, product, the first year multiple times, right? It's like continue to iterate and always be open-minded to that.
I mean, we're seeing brands that are 15 years old that are continually iterating. Like I call it kind of constant evolution, not revolution. So
Yeah.
constant evolution of how you speak to your consumer, how your brand is demonstrating its core values to the
Mm-hmm.
consumer. You constantly have to be evaluating, and are we messaging the right things, and
Mm-hmm.
is it resonating with that consumer?
Yeah, I love it. And for you, as in the kind of investor space, for brands that are approaching you, how important is like the story, the founder? This there's like this traditional, like the trope, if you will, in our space is I had some health issue, there wasn't something to fill it. I created this product, and it's a very personal story. I've heard this like 1,000 times now, but I'm curious. Does that matter?
I mean, to a degree, not really.
Okay.
At least in my personal opinion. I think as investors, we respect the story. We want to
Mm-hmm.
understand how this product came into existence, and sometimes it's an unbelievably compelling story that is going to resonate with the consumer, and we've already seen it having an impact where it's providing very authentic voice, and a voice of real authority
Mm-hmm.
that can speak to this product, why it was created, what it does, et cetera. And I think, again, I keep going back to Bloom, but I think Mari is a very authentic and authoritative voice in
Mm-hmm.
her category. And that's important to us, being authentic and being authoritative, but it's not absolutely necessary. It's
Yeah.
not, it's not like we won't invest if you don't have this authentic story around you that,
Yeah.
that you're recovering from celiac and you created this
Mm-hmm.
product, et cetera. It's more about, do we believe in you as a
Yeah.
founder, and do we
Yeah.
believe that we can back you to exit? And, oftentimes too, some of our founders have preemptively kind of transitioned themselves out into maybe more of a chief sales officer, chief product officer, roles that
Mm-hmm.
they're much more suited for, because they understand that they were the right person to scale it from 0 to 10, but they're not the right person to scale it from 10 to 100.
Yeah. Yeah. Very fair point. Right on. Thinking about Amberstone, and just there's a number of investment groups, or that kind of do what you do. How does like an Amberstone like become the one that like Bloom chose? Like what is the differentiation that you bring?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, everybody really needs to define what they do well. I'd say from our perspective, it really comes back to a little bit of what I said about founders. It's this perseverance and this ability to build trust over time. So, almost any brand that we have partnered with, we've known for at least a year. And
Wow.
Ashley from Mush, I met in
She's
2018.
great. Yeah. Yeah.
She's phenomenal, and I met her in 2018, and we closed our deal in 2022 with her. And so, really, it's about demonstrating long-term value, demonstrating a long-term interest in seeing your brand scale. It's about providing value before an investment is even made, I would say. And so, for us around Bloom, I really started talking to them in January of 23. They tried to do a few different things. It didn't really work out. We re-engaged in June of 23. We brought to the table uh, another individual who had significant experience within a category that they were, very eager to expand into. That individual then brought a large strategic to the table in Nutrabolt to help support kind of the expansion there.
Wow.
And that whole investment group was really brought together through our conversations with Bloom, our thoughts on where they wanted to go, what their new product development pipeline looked like, and what they really wanted to execute on, and who the best groups to support them would be. So that was us, this other individual that had been through beverage, a number of times, and then Nutrabolt coming together to support them on that round. And I think that's really how we differentiate ourselves. I mean, I'll say, there are people out there that will say, "Oh, we'll get you Kroger. Like we will
Yeah.
get you
Yeah.
Kroger." you can't
No.
get distribution. Like no
Yeah.
fund will ever get you distribution. What we can do, and what I think Amberstone does incredibly effectively, is leverage the data that we have access to help you build the most compelling data story that you can put
Beautiful.
together
Yep.
for a specific retailer. And then we can get you in front of the right buyer to put your story to work, to put it into practice. And I think that's really where we become effective is leveraging phenomenal data stories, crafting them in a way that help you get in front of the buyer and then put your best foot forward to gain that point of distribution and support it with velocity support. And then, some of the ancillary back office stuff, really helping you kind of institutionalize your financial reporting, prepare yourself for continued growth, thinking through kind of strategic exit, if who are the right people to be talking to, if you want to use a banker, who are the right bankers to talk to. Is it Janica? Is it Brandon Ng? Is it, Vinette? Is it, whomever it might be for your category? Like we definitely have those relationships, and oftentimes they're very open and receptive to taking our phone calls, but it's really about kind of working with brands to institutionalize them. And I don't mean that in like a bad way. Like this is professionalizing these businesses and really preparing them for that next stage of growth where you have to have those pieces in place to effectively scale in an efficient manner without kind of the wheels coming off the bus.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I see your passion as you're talking about this value you're creating.
You know what? And I hate, I cannot stand the term value add.
Okay.
It frustrates me so much.
It's stricken from our meeting today.
We can't, as investors, it should just be understood that you add value. You're not just capital.
It's permission to play.
Like that's table stakes, that you can bring something to the table other than just capital, that you can bring a network to bear, bring an expertise to bear, bring something to bear that will improve the operations and that will improve the chances of success for these founders. And I think it just is such a frustrating term where people are like, oh, we're value add investors, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, yeah, like you should be a value add investor. If you weren't, you're doing something wrong.
Right.
So I try to avoid that at all costs.
Well, you say the brand succeeding, but then you succeed. Like you're very aligned, right? Like
We're aligned. I mean, even down to the term sheet. So, I've seen some fairly egregious term sheets. I think that the worst I saw, at one point I saw 4x preferred within a term sheet. And, 99.9% of the term sheets that we will put out are a 1x preferred with standard, standard protective provisions. Like that's 99%. Now, we're seeing as these brands have scaled more efficiently over time, we are seeing that some secondary is becoming a pretty prevalent part of transaction structure. And certainly as brands increase that amount of secondary, we are going to put a little bit more structure around it. So maybe a 2x preferred starts to creep in, maybe a 12% accruing dividend over the 5 years comes to play, where it switches to a cash payment after 5 years, because these brands are hyper efficient. They've really scaled and they know how to continue to do that. And, obviously at some point, like we do need to make our return and we do need to de-risk that return if you're taking a significant amount of capital off the table. And so, we might protect ourselves like that, but, we've never gone above a 2x. And I think that begins to align us very well with our brand partners that we participate in with. And, our interests are very much aligned with their interests at the end of the day.
I love it. And just for the audience that doesn't understand, there's like a 1x and a 4x preferred and what that means for the founder. Could you explain that?
It's basically when you get your money back, who gets their money back and how much of their money they get back before you see anything. So on a 1x preferred, we get our money back before participating, as if we converted into common on a 1-to-1 ownership basis. A 4x preferred, we will get not only our money back, but 4 times our money back before you see a single dollar come out. And so, in high flying opportunities where, you exit at 6x revenue and it's not necessarily a big deal, but there's been certainly a few examples that I can think of over the past 2 years in particular where the exits have not been as strong as they might have been 4 or 5 years ago.
Of course.
And the amount of dollars available, the private equity fund really eats into 90% of the total dollars available. And so as a founder,
Yeah.
you're left, you've built this business over the last 8 to 10 years, you've gotten it to an exit, and now you're left with,
Nothing to show.
really not a ton of capital left over to show for it. Maybe enough you're going to pay off your mortgage or something, but certainly not what you envisioned at the end of the day, and certainly not enough compensation for the work that you've put into it. And so,
Yeah.
I think those types of structures really misalign the investor and the entrepreneur, the founding team. And oftentimes I just don't think a number of them understand kind of what the true ramifications are in a scenario that is not necessarily the most positive scenario. So really, really understanding that with your lawyers, really going through what the implications of different pref stacks look like, and really running it through, not just in that we exited for 350 million scenario, but also that scenario of like we exited for 120 million. What does that look like? So making sure you have an understanding of that is really important.
Okay. Thank you. And in terms of like what it looks like to work, let's say you did the investment in Bloom, what level of connection do you have with the brand after the investment's made? I know you're helping out with data, you're helping out with introductions. Is there weekly meetings, monthly meetings, just board meetings? I imagine it varies.
We do a monthly financial check-in just to kind of see, get a health check of the business in real time. Just say, okay, how did you perform this month? Are we on budget? Are we off? Where are we off? Why are we off? Are these structural issues that we need to address? Are these one-time issues that we are confident will solve themselves? If it was a rough April gross margin, is May going to be much better? And are we comfortable there? Do we need to start addressing these issues so we can be really, really proactive there? And then, obviously we have our quarterly board meetings where, we treat it much less as backward looking, just because we have understood what the business is doing in any given month, and much more forward looking and strategic, saying, what do we need to execute over the next 90 days together? What do we want to put in place? How do we see this brand continuing to evolve? What are the large strategic decisions that we make? So that's sort of the general cadence of traditionally what we do. I would say on any given day, any of us are getting text messages from our founders that are like, it could be anything from like, hey, I'm going to go to a workout class in San Francisco. Do you want to come with me? To, hey, we're having a fire drill at the production facility because, one of our machines went down. Like, can you help us? So it really runs the spectrum, but I would say that's the type of relationship that we have with our founders.
Very kind of intimate. We're there for each other. You're not
we're
like
a text message away.
Yeah, I love that. You're not some enemy. You're not some heavy-handed. I don't even want to share with you what's really going on because you're going to beat me up. It's like, no, we're in this together. Is the sense I get.
Oh yeah, no, I mean we understand our businesses in a very intimate manner, and we know if things are going right, and we also know if things are going wrong. And frankly, we're the type of partner that just is, I would say, fairly even keeled. Like if things are going great, we'll be the person that just says, okay, like let's manage our expectations and let's take a deep breath. Like, this is great. We can celebrate that things are going really well, but at the same time, we all know that how quickly things can change in this industry. So let's just stay the course. If things are not going well, that's fine. Like, we expect that things are not going to go to plan, and we're going to work with you to get back onto plan. And we are going to have an outcome that is beneficial to everybody, and we're going to work with you to get there. But let's just stay the course. Keep it even keeled, regardless of the peaks and valleys that we're all going to experience together.
And there are going to be peaks and valleys. We acknowledge that, and it's really how you respond to it. We have a choice.
Exactly.
We can be in victim mode, or we can figure it out together.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Okay, I have a brand on my mind that, if you think about that progression you talked about at the beginning, they did friends and family, they did Angel, got hooked up with an Angel network. They created amazing packaging, amazing product. I hosted a pitch slam at Sprouts a couple of weeks ago, and they were immediately accepted. Like, we want this. This is going on shelf. We're doing it. And I have the COO of the brand reach out to me, and it's like, okay, but we're not quite ready for VC yet. No one's able to do this. Our margins aren't there yet. But we know we have visibility. We have visibility to get there, and we kind of tapped out the angels. and they're in this like in between phase, right? And it's looking good, and I don't know what to tell them. Like where do they go? Do you have any ideas?
So remind me, like maybe top line revenue of the brand or rough,
Top line probably 750,000 at this point. So very young.
and the margins
Say
aren't there.
let's say they're 35% right now. And
Fully
I always tell our branding to be 45 up and 50 plus to really be in a beautiful
full,
spot.
fully loaded with
Mhm.
freight out.
Yep.
I mean, 35 is not the worst place to be, particularly as a young brand.
Yep.
And what they probably need like 500K.
Yep. That's it. Like let's go kill Sprouts, right? Kill the 3-month test, go national, continue to prove it out.
I mean, I still think that there is an angel network universe that exists. I mean, when you really think about it, that's $500,000 checks. Like really take it into bite size, like $500,000 checks or $50,000 checks. And I think when you think about it that way, you're like, yeah, I could probably find 10 people to write 50,000.
Yeah.
That seems achievable. I think that check size is a little bit difficult. I think really the venture community wants to start writing $1 million plus.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a tough like kind of valley to jump over.
It's not obvious. And in terms of angel networks, I don't know if you have knowledge of this, but where do people go? Is it just LinkedIn searching or?
Yeah, I mean, I think you find one, you find them all. So, the Angel Group is one that I'm a part of that I think has done an incredible job. Adam Spriggs is awesome. He's built just an incredible community. You have Irish Angels, which is a really interesting community. Really kind of built off of more of like a Notre Dame type of alumni base,
Cool.
But oftentimes because of their location in South Bend, they tap into that Chicago Angel Network, which is very heavily skewed towards food and beverage, given some of the brands that are based out of Chicago. And so, I think you get in with like an Angel Group, an Irish Angels, those types of things, and then you just ask, what are the other Angel groups I should be talking to?
Because they have awareness of each other.
Yeah. There's some accelerators like the SKU Accelerator. I think is pretty interesting. Redbud's way of building business is interesting. So there's definitely ways if you kind of lift your head up a little bit from trying to run it and get creative, you can find some capital out there.
Okay. That's really good to hear. Yeah. She asked me and I'm like, oh, I guess more angel groups. Well, which angels? I'm like, okay, let's, to your point, they already had they already had an angel network that invested. So where are they going back to them? I know you're not interested or more, but who do you know?
Exactly.
Right. That's it. And then they've a vested interest in helping at that point, right? They're early investors. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So that makes a lot of sense. And I'm curious how much you think about, and this is kind of an area I like to go into in all my podcasts, is the distribution system. Obviously, you're digging into the financials. You see how much in terms of channel costs like KE Unify, other large distribution models take. And I don't know. It feels like in some ways it doesn't feel sustainable. So much of of that gross sales to net sales, that adjustment of 6 to 12% is going to the distributor today. And it hurts. It could be actually part of the reason why you would go to a Walmart first, right? Or a Target first or a Costco first. Is because
I mean the direct
costs.
distribution is certainly interesting. DSD networks can be interesting. Right now, I think we're stuck in a situation where Unify and KE are necessary evils. They basically have an oligopoly on distribution. I do believe, and this is slightly anecdotal, and it's certainly not an area that we play in. We're not looking at tech-enabled distribution or ways to disrupt the supply chain necessarily. But given the amount of pushback from the entrepreneurial community, and you go on LinkedIn on any given Tuesday, and you're going to see somebody blasting Unify or somebody blasting KE. One of two things has to happen: either Unify and KE will listen. I see a couple of scenarios. I see the entrepreneurial community really coming together and just saying like that, no more.
Mm.
Like, this is unacceptable.
We're on
And
strike. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, to an extent, but how do you get your product to the store? How do
Yeah,
you do
right.
this? Yeah, like
They
they
kind of
kind of
have
hold
you.
all the cards. The more
Mm.
likely scenario that I see is that retailers retailers and some sort of technology solution are going to come
Mm.
together to say, like, this is not a sustainable way of doing business, that UNFI and KE don't provide enough value to the end retailer and to the
Mm.
beginning company, that there's something fundamentally
Yeah.
wrong. And I think we
Yeah.
all can recognize that there is a problem with KE
Yes.
and there's a problem with UNFI, and those problems tend to get fixed. There
Mm.
tend to be
The
solutions that
market.
get
Yeah.
created. The
Yeah.
market finds a solution for it. And I think we're in that that stage right now where I would imagine, if I were, maybe a food tech business or a B2B2C type of business that's emerging, like, there would be significant interest from the venture community. I don't know,
Yeah.
who those funds are, what
Right.
those businesses are. I can only hope that they are all getting funded with significant amount of dollars, and that, they're coming straight after KE and UNFI, and in the next couple of years we have some sort of solution that
Yeah.
is new to market and will also force UNFI and KE to react. And
Right.
that's what I fundamentally believe. Whether that comes to fruition in the next 3 years or the next
Mm.
10 years, I don't know, but
Yeah.
it will happen. Like, that fundamentally will
Yeah.
happen, because what they're doing isn't sustainable, and they're creating,
Mm.
so much animosity from the founder community, and from some of the
Yep.
larger brands as well, that are just like, this is ridiculous. Like, I can't believe I have to deal with
Mm.
this.
Right. Yeah, it's
So
crazy. And I
I
think
think animosity
what
will
I think
generate some sort of change.
there's energy. There's energy. And I think
Yeah.
if we think about like how like KeHE was founded, they were the ones doing like the extremely slow moving, like the Latino set or the Asian set, right? Remember those in like conventional grocery stores? That's where
Yeah.
KeHE started. They were
Yeah.
truly a specialty distributor that didn't, the products they carried, if they ran out of it, didn't really matter because they didn't sell much anyway, right? And then this whole switch where specialty became natural, and then these stores became itemized 100% natural, took like KeHE and UNFI from being like, hey, a small percentage of the sales going into our grocery store to being the entire 80%, 90% of what's going to the grocery store. Was a shift they weren't set up for, and they'd claim to be specialty distributors, right? But they're really wholesalers effectively today, and trying to do specialty. And I think that where you're going, I agree with. There's definitely a hole in the supply chain and a need for specialty distribution that's not like traditional 30-year-old distribution, which was like the Latino set, the Asian set, these very slow moving sets, but effectively is the innovative brands across the entire store, that are just getting started,
Yep.
and where there's actually space and time that can be spent to help these brands, have understand what they're getting into, and have transparency, and to support them in this, kind of incubate them, if you will, until they're
Oh, and
ready to
not
become ready for a whole.
yeah,
Yeah.
and not push them to net 90 days because they can, and not push them
Yeah.
with unbelievable chargebacks that they didn't
Right.
even realize were coming down the pipeline, and
Right.
wrecking their cash flow and their ability to
Mhm.
actually manage the cash that's on their balance sheet. Like, it's ridiculous to see kind of how much the large distributors take advantage of some of the smaller brands.
Yeah, and it's truly just through a lack of transparency, right? And the
Yeah.
fact that you said earlier, we have no choice. If you want to get into this chain, you have to go through this system, because there's no other path for most
Yeah.
brands.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's crazy. I agree with you. I think we're headed in that direction. Um, Nick, thank you for spending the last hour with me. It was great to get to
Yeah.
know you better and to dig deeper into all this. And I've actually learned so much. I think I was thinking of the world in terms of like angels, and then just VC, and then private equity. And I'd never thought about the nuance. And thank you for that. You
Yeah.
expanded my mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm always happy to come away and knowing people have learned something, and certainly have enjoyed the conversation myself.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. All the best to you, and look forward to the next time we're together.
Sounds good, Luke.